execute. A single large open world has been explored to exhaustion. No Man's Sky's attempt at an effectively infinite galaxy felt hollow and lifeless until the developers spent what amounted to an entire second development cycle remedying it. A cluster of star systems sits in an interesting middle ground, distinct enough from either approach to carve out its own identity, while still offering the kind of scope that feels appropriate for this kind of game. The decision to draw the player into that cluster through a group of eccentric adventurers they gradually join is well judged, bringing with it a comfortable, nostalgic pull from countless stories built around a crew of misfits. The Terrormorphs are terrific antagonists, and the moment their origin is revealed, that they'd been traveling with us the entire time, right there inside our ships, lands with the kind of quiet horror that makes you immediately want to go back and recontextualize everything you saw before. The colony wars, positioned deliberately in the game's past rather than its present, demonstrate a real authorial confidence. The writers chose to show us the aftermath rather than the event itself, and in doing so gave the settled systems a sense of lived history that most games would fumble. The Crimson Fleet questline is one of the game's unambiguous highlights. The option to go full pirate, to genuinely infiltrate the fleet, or to play both sides against each other simultaneously gives it a moral flexibility that keeps you invested. The whole visual and narrative architecture of Neon, the layered backstory, and eventual fate of Baiae Victus. These are setups with exceptional foundations. There is so much fertile ground here. There really is, too. And yet that scope turns out to be precisely where the whole thing starts to come apart. I find myself drawing comparisons to No Man's Sky again and again when I think about Starfield. They are genuinely quite different games in most respects, but they share the same fundamental flaw. Both are as wide as an ocean and as shallow as a puddle. I used to assume it was No Man's Sky's essentially limitless planet count that created the emptiness, that the problem was infinite scale. But Starfield, with its far more restrained yet still substantial number of worlds, produces a nearly identical feeling. The real issue is that these planets are just empty. A full moon or planet's worth of land is genuinely, staggeringly large, and filling it with anything meaningful through handcraft is simply not feasible. The only available tool is procedural generation, and it is immediately and plainly visible for what it is from the moment you step onto your second planet. I'll ask it plainly. Who actually ventures into more than 2 or 3 of these procedurally generated structures? Really? Nobody, I'd argue. Not in any genuine spirit of discovery, aimlessly wandering across a landscape waiting to see what pops up is not compelling exploration. It is time spent in the absence of purpose. What players actually come to these games for is the pull of story and faction, the shape of a journey, the choices available to them, and the weight of their consequences. What draws us is the central hubs, the cities, the seats of power, the criminal underworlds. And this is where the broader scope reveals its second problem. It makes those central hubs feel small and peripheral by comparison. Picking this kind of thing apart only goes so far, of course. No game can account for every expectation. Suspension of disbelief is always part of the implicit contract between a player and a game world, and the developers clearly put genuine effort into maintaining immersion throughout. But there is a particular strain placed on that contract when the United Colonies, an organization described as fielding a full army, Navy, Marine Corps, Special Forces, and dedicated xenowarfare divisions with capital ships that look genuinely formidable, apparently struggle to hold their own against a rival faction headquartered in what amounts to a village. This juxtaposition of stated scale versus visible reality is not an isolated problem. It runs through the whole game. Hopetown is not a town in any meaningful sense. It is a single manufacturing facility with a cafe bolted onto the entrance. Neon is a fishing platform that your ship nearly clips every time you depart. during the colony wars that precede the events of Starfield. The United Colonies alone are said to have suffered 150,000 in military casualties. Looking at the settlements where these people are supposed to have lived and worked, I genuinely cannot account for them. Londinium was a disappointment, built up in the fiction as practically overrun with terrormorphs, and then presenting a couple of dozen when you actually arrive. The terrormorph origin twist landed well, that I will grant unreservedly. I did not see it coming, and it was satisfying, but Neon needed more density. One additional major criminal or corporate organization embedded in its underworld would have gone a long way. The player's dealings with Bioevictus feel underdeveloped given how much narrative weight he's supposed to carry. 2. And then there is the space travel, which disappointed people in ways that were both predictable and still somehow startling when they materialized. Being instantly teleported to each destination rather than flying there yourself clashed with what players reasonably expected from a space exploration RPG. The Free Lanes update addresses this, and I will return to that shortly. My own grievances with Starfield end, appropriately enough, at its ending. It simply trails off without direction or momentum. The revelation about Earth's fate is genuinely well-written and well-performed. Voice acting carries it effectively. But then the game shunts you into a confrontation with the Starborn as the supposed crescendo of your personal journey toward the Unity, and it lands with a thud rather than a climax. Former lead quest designer Will Shen, who departed Bethesda after Starfield shipped, has spoken about how that ending came together, cobbled from what remained after time ran out, with no final dedicated locations to draw on. Hearing that explanation, it makes every bit of sense. The overarching pattern across my entire time with the game: remarkable ideas, serviceable build-up, and then a payoff that fails to arrive at the height it promised. That pattern had real consequences. I want to step back into Starfield's defense for a moment here, because while that player retention graph is genuinely damaging for a launch of Starfield's ambitions and budget, it is far from the catastrophe it is sometimes presented as. At the time of writing, Starfield is sitting at just over 2,000 concurrent players, with a 24-hour peak of around 5,000. Those numbers place it in roughly the same company as Kerbal's space program, Civilization 6, and Bethesda's own Fallout 3. Now more than 15 years old, that particular peer group is not entirely flattering, I admit. But scroll down that same list a little and you'll find Death Stranding 2, barely a month from its PC release at time of writing, already operating in Starfield's range. And Starfield's peak numbers on Steam alone outperformed both Destiny 2 and the recently released and reasonably well-received Crimson Desert. Many of the players those initial peaks represent genuinely connected with what the game offered, as I did. It functions as a proper traditional action RPG of the kind I genuinely enjoy. It often looks excellent. The interior detail inside your ship in particular is wonderful, and the game's overall aesthetic is one I'm fond of. Much of its world building is carefully constructed. The settled systems feel like they have a history that shaped the present behavior of their factions and inhabitants. The gunplay is solid. The voice acting is performed to a high standard across the board. I would remind the chief diplomat who he's speaking to. If it's my father you're looking to address, you're welcome to consult a medium. The sound design and score fit the world they're scoring. And for a Bethesda release, the launch stability was genuinely impressive. Once more, I had a pleasant time with Starfield. I suspect there are many players who arrived at a similar place. People who carried genuine affection for Bethesda, who were excited for this, who enjoyed it without quite being swept away by it. A substantial audience, potentially still interested enough to be cultivated. And yet what Bethesda actually did with that audience goes something like this. Pour years of effort and obvious care into their first new IP in a quarter century, release it to record-breaking numbers and real critical acclaim, Then watch the player counts collapse rapidly and respond to the heavily criticized first DLC by going largely quiet for months. They only resurfaced in March 2025 after players prompted them publicly on social media. They promised exciting plans for the year, then released no new content until spring 2025, when Free Lanes, Terran Armada, and the PS5 launch all arrived simultaneously. And as that energy was being re-injected into the game, Todd Howard was publicly downplaying what it meant. But look, if Starfield is something that didn't connect with you right away, or you bounced off of it and found it boring in places, I don't think this is going to change that fundamentally. I am looking at a game that limped through quarter after quarter with what can only fairly be described as weak player numbers, suggesting that the majority of people who disengaged in the first 2 weeks had found no reason to return, while the people who actually cared about the game were desperate for more. That more eventually arrived, and the person who led the entire development is publicly saying it won't change anyone's mind. There is a disconnect in that position that I find genuinely difficult to make sense of. Does Bethesda want people to come back to Starfield or attract new players to it? Because it does not sound like it. Now, before we talk about where Starfield goes from here, and where Bethesda may be pointing it, there is a separate but deeply connected story worth telling. One that begins not with my own experience of wandering around New Atlantis, but with the night of September 6th, 2023, and everything that went wrong before many players even formed their first impressions of the game. Because Starfield's problems did not begin when players bounced off the empty planets or hit a wall at the ending. For a significant portion of its audience, they began the moment the game launched. Midnight, the 6th of September, 2023. Starfield goes live and millions of players pour into what Bethesda promised would be their magnum opus. The studio's first original IP in a quarter century. Out of the gate, the reviews are rapturous. An 83 on Metacritic, too. A flood of 9s and 10s rolling in from every outlet that matters. Critics are calling it extraordinary, a near-perfect space game, an achievement. And then something shifts. A few hours in, with time to breathe and reflect, those early assessments start to curdle. The PC performance is the first thing people notice, and not in a good way. The system requirements are, in a word, punishing. The game demands an SSD just to boot, and yet, despite all of that, space has never felt so choppy, even on NASA-grade machines. The frame rates are embarrassing. Low numbers, massive drops, stutters that have no business existing on hardware of that caliber. It also doesn't help that AMD sponsored the game, and Intel and Nvidia cards are the ones visibly suffering the most. There's no Nvidia DLSS support either, something the modding community managed to patch in within hours of launch. On Xbox, things are marginally more stable, but Todd has nonetheless shackled the entire platform to a 30 FPS cap, even on the 500 Series X. And that 30 FPS. That's the ceiling, not the floor. That's the ambition. Step into New Atlantis and watch that number sag into the low 20s. For those fortunate enough to clear the performance hurdle and actually play the thing, there are genuine bright spots. For the first time in a modern Bethesda title, physics are decoupled from frame rate. You can uncap without everything going haywire, without jump heights and movement speeds, and object behavior spiraling into chaos. The shipbuilding is legitimately impressive. Gun modifications are solid. There's RPG depth in places. And credit where it's due. This is one of Bethesda's cleaner launches in terms of show-stopping bugs. Far fewer corrupted save files. Far fewer moments where the whole thing falls apart at the seams. That's the Ledger's credit column. Everything else gets written in red. Starfield was conceived around a decade and a half ago. The trademark was filed 10 years back. Full development began 7 years before launch. After all of that time, what emerged was a game that feels, in many respects, skeletal. Missing features so fundamental that you have to blink to make sure you're not imagining their absence. A field of view slider, for instance. Fallout 3 had one, Fallout 4 had one. A simple text file edit in Starfield's own game files enables one. So why is it not in the shipped product? There's no ultra-wide monitor support, no HDR on PC. Save files don't even display thumbnail images. No brightness slider. No contrast or gamma controls of any kind. This matters because the game looks chronically washed out. If your display has any quirk at all, you're simply stuck with it. There's no in-game calendar either, despite the fact that Elder Scrolls Arena, a game released in 1994, included one. Your starting date is May 7th, 2030. If you lose track of the in-game date, you're doing the math yourself. And there's no in-game map. Arena had that too in 1994. These are not innovations that have been stripped away for bold artistic reasons. They are simply absent. Getting from the top of Neon to your ship in orbit involves, conservatively, 4 to 6 loading screens. The frequency is not an incidental annoyance. It is a structural problem. Space travel, by any reasonable measure, should feel exciting and dangerous. Outside the game itself, Starfield launched with a 170 collector's edition. A patch, some artwork, a box. The centerpiece was an electronic watch, and a significant number of units started breaking almost immediately. Modders addressed most of the P-side issues within days, so at least there's that. But what matters, ultimately, is the game itself. And here is where it gets interesting. Todd Howard and the team at Bethesda had, by some genuine miracle of ambition, built entire star systems to explore. He was not lying when he said it. There really are over 1,000 planets, functional spaceships, actual spaceflight, all running on a lineage that traces back to the same bones as Morrowind. As a technical achievement, it borders on miraculous. The freedom on offer here was supposed to be genuinely unparalleled. After completing the first mission, players board their ships and set course for the stars. Hold on, set course. And that was a loading screen. Surely, you could actually fly to planets in this massive space exploration RPG. Players spent hours attempting this. The answer, it turns out, is no. You cannot, because the planets in this game are functionally enormous JPGs drifting in an empty skybox. You cannot fly to them. Attempting it without loading screens costs real-world time. Lots of it. And eventually you just phase through the surface. Want to actually explore space in this space exploration game? Prepare to navigate through layers of aggressively disorganized interstellar menus. Then sit through multiple cutscenes and loading screens before you arrive anywhere. You cannot fly through atmosphere, too. You cannot take off from a planet's surface without triggering yet another loading screen. There are random space encounters. Pirates, bounty hunters, too. Contraband scans, the occasional unique event, but the space combat is mediocre, and every single one of these encounters can be instantly avoided by fast traveling away. Bethesda also never implemented any system to prevent encounters from repeating, so prepare to hear the same space broadcasts cycling endlessly. Space, a fairly significant component of an open-world space exploration RPG, is almost entirely vestigial. But fine, this is a Bethesda game. Their true strength has always been world-building, the handcrafted density of their environments. Once players actually land on planets, the real content would surely reveal itself. More handcrafted locations than Skyrim and Fallout 4 combined, Todd promised. Step out onto the surface of your first new world in the settled systems. There's a scanner, at least. A handful of undiscovered locations visible in the distance, hundreds of meters away. That's a long walk, so let's get the rover out. There is no rover. Bethesda built a planetary exploration game with no traversal vehicle and no readable surface map. The world does look good in places. The lighting and skybox work is strong. There are interesting creatures and geological formations scattered around, alien junk piles to sort through, some old facilities to poke into. The environmental storytelling, when it appears, is genuinely reminiscent of Bethesda at their best. But then you get back in the ship and go to another planet. Same formations, same creatures. The exact same cryolab. identical building layout, identical enemy placement, identical spawn points, the same dead bodies, the same notes, the same terminal entries. Bethesda built a 1,000-planet galaxy and populated it with roughly the same handful of copy-pasted locations shuffled around by a weirdly weighted algorithm that keeps serving up the same caves, cryolabs, and UC listening stations over and over. Even the main quest recycles these locations multiple times. The entire galaxy, in practice, contains about 4 real cities, around 24 small settlements, and a grand total of 50 genuinely unique locations, distributed across 1,000 planets. The temples, of which there are dozens, all lose their novelty fast because they are literally identical to one another, down to enemy placement and the single puzzle type they all share. And because they're procedurally scattered, half the time you'll encounter one of these supposedly ancient, untouched sacred structures sitting next to what amounts to a procedurally generated Taco Bell. Todd wasn't lying about being able to land anywhere. He just didn't mention that everywhere is essentially the same. The planets do have different weather systems, atmospheric hazards, too, and gravity levels. But the majority of planetary surfaces are repetitive flat terrain that you will be crossing on foot for stretches at a time. There are no proper mountains, no valleys, no rivers. There were oceans, and there were creatures designed to inhabit them. But Bethesda removed underwater swimming, so those modeled, textured, animated underwater creatures exist in the game world and are invisible to the player forever. And after just 15 minutes of running, a boundary reached message stops you. You haven't landed on a planet, you've landed on a small, randomly generated tile of a planet that contains almost nothing. The tiles don't persist across borders either. Cross into an adjacent tile and the terrain behind you will look completely different. There is simultaneously too little happening on planets, and also the opposite problem. For a game about space exploration, nowhere is actually unexplored. Land on a barren, irradiated moon at the far edge of the settled systems, and you'll still emerge 50 meters from 3 abandoned factories and a pirate camp. You're not discovering anything. You never are. The 4 actual cities in the game are not large, and the performance inside them is genuinely terrible. In the year 2332, entering any building requires a loading screen. New Atlantis, supposedly the largest and most technologically advanced city in the galaxy, contains something like 20 named inhabitants and is positioned in the middle of nowhere. And yet, a few hundred meters from this seat of power, you'll find pirate camps and mercenary outposts operating freely. Finding anything within the city is a genuine ordeal because, again, there is no functional surface map. The NPCs are an experience in their own right. Facial expressions that commit to their own particular uncanny valley, a complete immunity to gunshots fired in their vicinity, and a total absence of meaningful daily schedules. Oblivion's NPCs in 2006 had fairly detailed routines. These ones just wander in silence, staring through you. Nearly every named character has been tagged as unkillable. The AI behavior in general is something to behold. Combat pathfinding that regularly breaks, enemy spawns that make no spatial sense, units teleporting and glitching through geometry. Enemy variety is generously thin, bounty hunters with guns, pirates with guns, angry religious people with guns, a few robot types, and a range of mostly passive animals. The combat itself is actually competent. Feel and feedback are solid, but there isn't much of it. And joining the Crimson Fleet early in the game means the pirates you'd otherwise fight become your allies, which carves out even more of what little combat exists. Bethesda has been streamlining features for years, and Starfield continues that trajectory. Melee weapons exist but are scarce and non-modifiable, unlike their counterparts in Fallout 3 and 4. You can remove gun mods but cannot transfer them to other weapons. They simply vanish. No armor or weapon dismantling. You cannot loot outfits off NPC bodies. The settlement building system from Fallout 4 is present but hollow. No settler management, no raid systems, No economy, no real reason to engage with it. Stealth is noticeably worse than prior games. Enemies see through walls and platforms. Guards teleport to your location. Companions almost never crouch and constantly betray your position. The dialogue system is an improvement over Fallout 4's voiced protagonist approach. Dropping voice acting for the player character means more varied options, more persuasion opportunities, more nuance. The persuasion system uses multi-round speech checks, which is a reasonable design idea. The problem is that rather than writing specific persuasion dialogue for specific situations, the writing team pulled from a pool of generic options the game assigns randomly, meaning half of what you say will be contextually bizarre. The dialogue across the board tends toward the bland and functional. The quest design leans heavily on radiant structure. Fallout 4 was criticized for overdoing radiant quests, and Starfield dials that up further. A substantial portion of even the designated real quests feel procedurally generated. Fetch this, kill that. These are made worse by the loading screen tax every quest imposes. Need to speak to someone in another system. There's no FTL radio. No interstellar internet, no messaging. You travel several light years through multiple loading screens to have a 15-second conversation and then travel back. A significant chunk of the game's quests could be resolved via email. Your character wears a smartwatch for the entire game, but cannot call or text someone on the same planet. Yet steal a paperclip and every faction across every star system knows about it instantaneously. Most quest lines are linear, resolving into one of two outcomes, with no meaningful interaction between different faction storylines. Choices don't ripple outward. They don't mean much at all. And then there is the world itself. Bethesda's first original universe in 25 years. They couldn't lean on the bones of Tamriel or the Commonwealth. This had to be built from nothing. The result: according to creative direction that aimed for mainstream appeal and avoided anything too dark, too mature, or too challenging, is a setting that feels tonally closer to a children's adventure series than a gritty frontier space opera. Most characters are flat, morally upright, and lacking any texture that makes them memorable. Even the pirates feel like they've been approved by a content committee. The nightclub in Neon, ostensibly a seedy underworld den of vice, is populated by businessmen in suits carrying briefcases. An already built dismemberment system ported from Fallout 4 was stripped out entirely despite the game shipping with a mature rating. There are cool mechs in the game, visually interesting with entire story threads built around them. Can the player operate one? No. It's illegal in the fiction. Can enemies use them? No. They appear as background decoration in one or two locations. The actual story: a galaxy scarred by massive wars across multiple star systems, set comfortably decades after any of that conflict happened. Aims for a hard sci-fi sensibility. Then they put space wizards at the end. The entire endgame hinges on the player becoming Starborn, collecting the same artifact in the same temple with the same puzzle, repeated across those dozens of identical locations, over and over. The finale offers a jump to a parallel universe, but not one with meaningful variation. They're all the same, with roughly a 5% chance of one minor cosmetic change. Despite all of this, Starfield launches to enormous commercial success. Bethesda calls it their biggest launch in history. It's the top seller on Steam despite being free through Game Pass. Over 12 million players in the launch window. User reviews are very positive, and then the honeymoon ends, quickly and badly. On Steam, very positive slides to mostly positive. Mostly positive erodes into mixed. By December, mixed becomes mostly negative. Todd blames the bad reviews on the game being too different from expectations. December 7th, 2023. It's the Game Awards. Starfield is nominated. The Game of the Year goes to Baldur's Gate 3. Snubbed. Post-launch, the player numbers collapse with unusual speed. Within a month, the Steam peak of 330,000 players has thinned to 55,000. The month after that, 25,000. By December, less than 5% of the launch base remains, and it's not just players leaving. High-profile modders, people who built careers on Bethesda games, are abandoning Starfield mid-project. Within a few months, the updates materialize. 60 frames per second, a vehicle, a button to eat food. And remarkably, they added a map. Whatever goodwill those patches generated is immediately burned away when Bethesda unveils their paid mods program for a third time in company history. Offering individual quest mods for $7 each, post-launch reporting begins to fill in what actually happened during development. Back in 2016, full production on Starfield was just beginning. This was also a period of rapid expansion for Bethesda. A single building in Rockville with around 100 people became over 450 people spread across 4 teams, multiple cities, and multiple countries by 2023. That kind of growth changes everything. Individual developer freedom, the scrappy, experimental latitude that had always been part of how Bethesda worked, got squeezed out by the necessity of structured schedules and coordinated delivery. According to former developers, some of the most beloved features in Skyrim and 4 began as unofficial side projects that designers pursued during development windows. That kind of organic creativity became structurally impossible in the new environment. The result was checklist-based design. Features planned, assigned, shipped, and rarely integrated meaningfully with one another. Mechs that were fully built and then relegated to scenery. Zero-gravity systems that appear in a handful of moments and disappear around the middle of development. Negative internal feedback on gameplay prompted a massive directional pivot. Systems that had been central to the game were cut or hollowed out. Fuel consumption, serious planetary hazards, meaningful outpost necessity. The game shifted from something leaning into survival and resource management toward something casualized and accessible. Todd has spoken before about building worlds first and discovering the fun from within them. By his own account for Starfield, that discovery process happened in the final year of development. It took 6 years to find what the game was supposed to be, too. And for most of the people who played it, they couldn't find it at all. Patches came. A vehicle arrived eventually. A map materialized as though from a dream half remembered. DLC was promised and partially delivered. But a wound dressed is not a wound healed, and Starfield's Steam numbers kept moving in one direction. For Skyrim, it took roughly a decade before the active player base dipped below 10,000. For Fallout 4, about 2 years. For Starfield, a few months. As of recent counts, Fallout 4 draws 6 times Starfield's players, Skyrim 7 times. The original plan. A long-term platform sustained by annual expansions. Grew quieter with each passing month of near silence from Bethesda until a single tweet appeared to confirm the game had not, in fact, been abandoned. All of which finally returns us to the question that underlies everything here. What is the point of Starfield now? Sitting with that question makes me genuinely a little sad to consider. There are 2 distinct paths to trace the future Bethesda had originally planned for Starfield after launch, and the direction they now appear to be pivoting toward out of necessity. The original intent seems clear. Starfield was designed to become a tentpole franchise alongside The Elder Scrolls and Fallout. The signals pointed to long-term annual expansion support, a universe players would inhabit for years. I believe they genuinely hoped that Starfield would become the thing that both of us played for a very long time. A world to live in indefinitely. The major inflection point that forced a rethink appears to have been the poor reception to Shattered Space rather than the initial player drop. Whatever projections they'd built for the franchise at that stage had to be torn up, and the developers retreated into a period of quiet replanning. That new roadmap is now apparently set, and the deliberate decision to release Free Lanes and Terran Armada as explicitly separate things, too. Despite the obvious option of presenting them as one combined update, signals something important. Bethesda had hoped to keep building onto Starfield in a modular, LEGO-style fashion maintaining a committed core audience who would reliably come back for each new chunk of content. What they got instead was a player base that felt too little motivation to keep inhabiting these worlds, who resented being forced to do most of their actual space exploration through Menace, who left unsatisfied by the narrative conclusion, or some mixture of all of the above. Players expected Bethesda to add content to Starfield after launch. What players actually wanted was for Bethesda to fix the structure of Starfield, presenting free lanes as a separate free update while charging under a tenner for Terran Armada. With a developer video of people sitting in comfortable chairs, awkwardly walking through what they're proud of, as though they hadn't already rehearsed all of it. Is Bethesda correctly identifying that distinction and making it visible? Don't overpromise. Downplay expectations somewhat. Begin rebuilding goodwill. Some version of the increasingly well-worn No Man's Sky redemption arc appears to be the destination here. And this worries me, not for reasons specific to Starfield, but for what that arc now represents for the industry more broadly. No Man's Sky was not the first game to travel that long road from disaster to rehabilitation, but it became the definitive case study. Partly because of where it launched during the social media hype cycle, and in no small part because the gap between the 2016 E3 trailer and the state of the actual shipped product was so devastatingly stark. The outrage was not manufactured from nothing. In the nearly 10 years since No Man's Sky has become a genuine success story, and a succession of games have attempted to follow its blueprint, Cyberpunk 2077 is probably the most prominent example. I finally played it last year, and it genuinely is quite good now. The problem is that this redemption arc has been lent into so heavily and so reliably that it has become a net negative for the medium as a whole. It has now been demonstrated beyond any reasonable argument that even a genuinely terrible launch can be recovered from. A barely functional game can receive a full commercial release, not early access, a full release with full pricing. 2, and everything can work out fine eventually. That simply incentivizes publishers to push games out earlier and earlier in their development cycle, starting to realize their financial return sooner while deferring the actual completion of the product. Bethesda knows this dynamic personally through Fallout 76, another release that was outright bad at launch and is apparently in reasonable shape now. None of this is to suggest Starfield belongs in the same category as those more extreme examples, too. And I have genuine sympathy for the position game developers consistently find themselves in. The priorities of those who make games and those who sell them are in fundamental tension, and that tension has been decisively resolved in favor of one side for quite some time now. The ability of games to recover from even catastrophic launches has simply strengthened that side's argument further. Just release it. It'll be fine eventually. Everyone will make money. Remarkable. Games have, in a quite specific sense, become too large for their own well-being. The hype deliberately manufactured in the pre-launch window creates a ceiling of expectation that only the most extraordinary releases will ever actually meet. The scale these games operate at generates a structural dead weight that most buckle under, producing world after world of procedural blandness dressed in increasingly expensive visual clothing. The permanent support model, where a continuous revenue stream is aggressively pursued well past the point of creative exhaustion, relentlessly encroaches on the ability of talented developers to move forward and build the next genuinely exciting thing. This is going to sound naive in light of how modern game development actually functions. But does anyone just finish something and go make a better sequel anymore? My mind goes to Mass Effect. I know that trilogy is ancient history at this point. Bear with me, the original Mass Effect is considered foundational now, a beloved Genesis. Go back and actually play it today though, and its rough edges, particularly in its gameplay mechanics, are entirely obvious. What it did brilliantly was lay the groundwork for an epic trilogy and give everything that followed real forward momentum. I feel something similar about Mass Effect Andromeda. Another troubled launch, another game that fell headfirst into the social media hyperbole machine and couldn't escape it, another set of rough edges that those eager to wound it were delighted to showcase. But what Andromeda was genuinely trying to do was establish the architecture for a new trilogy. It was building towards something. And I'll say that by the time it reached its final missions, blasting across Meridian in the Nomad in that clear nod to the first game, it had started to find itself. Was I floored by Andromeda? No. Was I genuinely curious about what came next in that presumptive trilogy? Absolutely. I assumed Andromeda was the new Mass Effect 1, warts and all, and that what followed would justify it. That trilogy was never completed. Starfield could also have been a Mass Effect 1. So much of what it establishes is rich with sequel potential. In fact, 2, the shape of Starfield's universe might suit a Red Dead Redemption-style prequel most naturally. A game following Barrett, for instance, tracing his arc from his time with the United Colonies through how he joined Constellation, through the loss of his partner in the Colony Wars, culminating in the discovery of the first artifact that set Starfield's story in motion, or a new protagonist in Arthur Morgan's role. An active participant in those colony wars whose experience recontextualizes that whole conflict through specific writing and quests. A game that puts us in Bayi Victus orbit as an underling, watching what he was willing to do, leading directly to the events at Londinium. What I want, in short, is not more material bolted onto a story that has already been told. I want to see what comes next. I want forward momentum. Starfield is a victim of an industry that has reframed its central question. It used to ask, how do we make games people love enough to give us some of their money? And now asks, how do we capture people's money so we can keep producing content for our games? My overwhelming impression of Starfield in the wake of the Free Lanes update is simply how little it changes for me personally. On this point, I find myself in complete agreement with Todd Howard. A lot of genuine work clearly went into this, too. And the development timeline alone demonstrates the scale of that effort, so credit to the team. That said, and admitting I haven't experienced all of its new content, the headline feature, the ability to fly between worlds within a solar system without navigating a menu left me oddly cold. It feels almost strange to write this, but perhaps the original approach was correct for what this game is. Or perhaps that simply reflects my play style. Perhaps part of it is that flying this way exposes how fundamentally misaligned the scaling is between your ship and the worlds you are approaching. The illusion shatters rather than deepens. What I can say is that I haven't found much use for arriving somewhere more slowly than I need to. I'm possibly in the minority on that, and I can absolutely see why players whose instinct is to explore en route to a destination, which has always been core to how Bethesda games work, would genuinely value this update. But it doesn't move the needle for me on Starfield as a whole. What did? Starting from scratch with a new character, there is a particular personal irony in this. I spent a good portion of this piece essentially asking why games can't recapture the magic that keeps drawing us back to the classics, and lamenting that Starfield hadn't managed it. And then I found myself playing through the introduction with a new character and feeling, however faintly, something like genuine enthusiasm for giving it a real second chance. I think that feeling, small as it is, contains some part of the answer to what Starfield's point actually is now. The Elder Scrolls 6 is out there somewhere in Bethesda's future. Even if Starfield continues to underperform, they cannot simply walk away from it. The reputational cost would be too high. Especially with their two major legacy franchises watching on, maintaining at least visible support for Starfield protects Bethesda's brand, demonstrates commitment to the IPs they steward, and, crucially, offers reassurance to fans of both the Elder Scrolls and Bethesda as a developer that they will not be abandoned. This is reputation management. The more clinical corporate rationale accounts for the rest, Starfield remains a commercial platform even at reduced scale. 2. PS5 sales and Game Pass engagement still matter to the business. And perhaps more meaningfully still, Starfield has become a live test environment for the technology that will eventually go into building the Elder Scrolls 6. The creation engine is being upgraded for that game, and some portion of that work is almost certainly happening in real time through Starfield. In UI frameworks, modding infrastructure, cross-platform release strategies, and a dozen other technical vectors. Everything that is learned here feeds directly into what comes next. The industry had shifted around Bethesda while they were building. The competition was sharper now, the expectations higher, the tolerance for release day omissions thinner. The weight of what Starfield had cost them. In trust, in goodwill, in the years that would never come back, would either make them desperate or make them careful. Starfield is now, in meaningful part, a technology incubator. Whether the lens you apply is reputation management, revenue maintenance, or technological experimentation, what Starfield's existence is oriented toward. Beneath the surface, beneath the trailers and the update notes and the carefully worded developer conversations, is priming everything for the Elder Scrolls 6. The engine, the audience, the institutional knowledge, the hard-earned lessons written in player counts, and review scores. It is scaffolding dressed as a destination, a bridge built to be crossed and left behind. And somewhere in that quiet truth lives the saddest thing I have found in all of this. That a universe this full of light, too, this genuinely brimming with ideas that deserve to become something lasting, has been repurposed as the rehearsal space for someone else's story. History has always been generous to Bethesda in the end. Whether that generosity had limits was the question nobody had yet answered. Hanging in the dark of space like a planet you could point to, but never quite reach. I so wish the point of Starfield now was simply to make me excited for Starfield 2. Instead, it carries its ambitions like uncharted stars. Burning, distant, and pointed at a horizon it was never quite built to reach.